Well, as we get it rolling on another busy Monday morning across Kansas City, we have two tragedies that we are focused on this morning here in town. And one of them is a story that we have had to talk about far too frequently right here in our backyard. And that is the death of another officer in the line of duty. Over the weekend, it was Wyandotte County Sheriff's Deputy Elijah Ming who died. Elijah Ming said that 38-year-old Sean Harris opened fire on him as he was responding to a call for help from a female who was moving out of a residence on Saturday afternoon. And it resulted in Elijah Ming losing his life. You look back on what happened on Saturday, and it's a reminder that whether it's that story, whether it's the story that John mentioned, the collapse of the Family Dollar roof that resulted in one person getting killed, no matter what, you're coming off the weekend, you probably did a bunch of things that are par for the course that you don't think twice about doing. It was another ho-hum routine weekend. Some ups, some downs, and everything in between. We have men and women who are serving our communities who are dealing with life and death. And they're doing it, as is too often times the case, very routine calls. Right? It's things that you would never expect to result in a deadly incident. When Elijah Ming had to go on a call and responded to a call for help from a female who was moving out of a residence on Saturday afternoon, no one would have ever expected or projected what ended up happening to happen. These are routine. The men and women in our law enforcement departments all over Kansas City deal with this stuff all the time. It's not something that they think twice about. But it's oftentimes these kinds of calls that get surprisingly dangerous, violent, and deadly. And that is what happened on Saturday. Now, we're learning more about who this individual is and some of the backgrounds of this individual. He did have a criminal record on both sides of the state line. He is somebody who had spent several years in prison due to incidents on both sides of the state line dating back to 2011 and 2012. So he was known to law enforcement. And too often that is the case. Now, there's nothing in this case where you sit there and you say to yourself, this guy was out of prison early. I've read up a lot on this individual, Sean Harris, and he was discharged from state custody December of last year, December 11th of 2024. Stemming from 2012 convictions. He got 11 and a half years in prison. A Kansas judge allowed the Missouri sentence to run concurrently to his sentences in Kansas, and he was out of prison last December. In talking to people, there's nothing that I've seen that has suggested that Sean Harris should have been still in. Now, listen, these are obviously bad people who probably should all be in prison longer than they have been in hindsight. But there was not some issue here with the justice system that led to Sean Harris being out of custody, being out of prison, being back in regular standard society that led him potentially to this shooting of Elijah Ming. But when it comes to Elijah Ming, you think about some of the losses that we've had here in Kansas City as of late. And the last few years alone, you've got Officer Moldbauer in KCMO, Officer Oswald in Fairway, Officer Vasquez in North Kansas City, Officer Madrid Evans in Independence, and Officer Mosier in Overland Park are some of the most recent names that come to mind. And now, sadly, Sheriff's Deputy in KCK, Wyandotte County, Elijah Ming, finds himself on this tragic list. And if you notice, this list spans both sides of the state line. It's not unique to KCMO. I mean, you know, you've got Fairway, you've got North Kansas City, you've got Overland Park, and these are some of the safest communities we have in the entire Kansas City area. You have routine traffic stops involved here. You have house calls. Like, these are not what we would view as typically and traditionally very dangerous situations, but those are the ones that can become the most dangerous. It's why when you get pulled over, the cop is not like, well, I know John, I know Garner, I know Pete, so this is going to go fine. You don't know what you're walking into. Same thing on these house calls. And I just have great gratitude and appreciation for the men and women this morning who are listening to KCMO Talk Radio, who are waking up, getting set to be a servant to their community, and they are literally risking their lives every single day in a way that most of us can't even fathom. What we do, what most of you do, is completely different from what these men and women do. And it doesn't matter if it's KCMO, if it's Overland Park, if it's Lee Summit, or if it's Liberty. These problems can impact all of them. These tragedies can impact all of them. Of course, some are more likely than others, but it doesn't change the fact that they're all risking it and they don't know what they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, or who, more importantly, who they're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. So our prayers, of course, go out for Officer Ming, his family. He leaves behind a wife. There was a vigil last night on his behalf at a local church there actually the vigil was held outside the Wyandotte County Courthouse. About 75 people showed up to that memorial service, and we will have Wyandotte County Sheriff Daniel Soptic on the show this morning at 8:05. Looking forward to that conversation with him. Now, speaking of things that no one would have expected from over the weekend, I mean, these stories, and this one in particular, this story after a Family Dollar roof collapsed in Kansas City right on Broadway, is another one of those, who would have seen this coming? One person has died, and one more is dealing with serious injuries after a roof collapsed at the 3700 block of Broadway at the Family Dollar just before 2:45 in the afternoon yesterday. Now, one person was pronounced dead at the scene. Victim was a 68-year-old man, and a 50-year-old female was transported to a local hospital where she is in critical condition. And this is one of those stories that you look at and you think to yourself, how many times have you walked into fill-in-the-blank store? I don't care. Family Dollar doesn't matter. You never in a million years expect that you are going to lose your life that way. You never sit there and say to yourself, this is something that's going to happen to me or my family or my loved one. When I say, John, I'm walking out and I'm going to a Family Dollar to pick up some, fill in the blank for the week or whatever it might be.
I thought some of the coverage I was watching suggested the guy was on his phone. He kind of walked out the door. Now, I'll tell you here on Channel 9 on the website here, I'm looking at Channel 9, and some people have complained because this thing has been drooping and sagging on the front. And so a couple of people, Channel 9's got like a timeline of people, so I don't know if official complaints have been turned in. But anyway, yeah, just a bad situation. You wonder with all this rain, maybe
that's
had
a good
something to
point.
do with it, that kind of stuff. But, yeah, just right there drooping right over the corner, and a guy standing there on his phone.
Yeah, Channel 9, you're right here. It did say there was one complaint made on Friday, July 25th, that the building was slowly tilting, and the complaint was assigned to the city's Neighborhood Preservation Department. Listen, not going to rag on the city over this, but no. I'm sure the city would have gotten to this by Labor Day of 2027, I would say, give or take. That's when they would have gotten around to this. But either way, this is, boy, what an absolute tragedy. But that's an excellent point there, John, between the rain and the fact that that roof may have already been weak. That could have led to what happened over the weekend at that Family Dollar. But that is just, man, what a just tragic situation. And you've got a Kansas City Fire and Police Department that already has their hands full. You had another homicide at 18th and Prospect yesterday. So it was a busy and really a tragic weekend in many respects around town. So as we move ahead here on KCMO on a Monday morning, Trump says a lot of stuff, right? And a lot of it you just take with a grain of salt. You don't sit there and say, well, this is definitely the thing he's going to do. I mean, a lot of what he says just is kind of stuff he says. He doesn't do a lot of it. But my concern is that one of our local U.S. senators actually thought that something Trump said off the cuff was a good idea. That's a concern to me. I'll tell you who it is and why coming up next on KCMO Talk Radio. So you got to love Trump, right? I mean, we're a decade into Trump more or less being a massive political figure in this country, and The beauty of it, one of the things I've learned in covering Trump is you take everything he says with a grain of salt, whether you really like what he says or you really don't like what he says. You take it all with a grain of salt. You don't freak out. You kind of see what he does, not what he says. Because if you just analyze Trump by what he says, you'll go nuts. It's not worth your time. It's really not. But then when one of our local U.S. senators decides that something that Trump said that was not really, I think, all that serious of a comment and was more of an off-the-cuff statement from Trump, when one of our local U.S. senators decides that's a really good idea and it's not, that's where I get more concerned. So Trump was talking over the weekend about tariffs and the revenue that we've gotten to the country from tariffs, and how he was thinking about maybe a rebate, dare I say, and call it a stimulus check for certain people in this country. And then Josh Hawley shared the video and was like, great idea. I'm going to introduce legislation on this. And it's like, no. Let's not go down this road. This is bad public policy. We just lived through this nonsense over the last few years with COVID. So let's play the audio from Trump first. Here's what he said over the weekend.
And don't you feel it, Mr. President, with all of that revenue coming in tens of billions of dollars, do you think there's the possibility of a rebate to the American public in terms of all of that money?
We're thinking about that, actually. We have so much money coming in, we're thinking about a little rebate, but the big thing we want to do is pay down debt. But we're thinking about a rebate. That's a very good question. You just made a lot of news. We're thinking about a rebate because we have so much money coming in from tariffs that a little rebate for people of a certain income level might be very nice.
Okay, all right, stop. We're $37 trillion in debt. We lived through COVID when people were printing money left and right, including Trump 1.0, and then, of course, Biden put it on steroids, and we just lit the dollar on fire. That's what we've done the last 5 years. We literally and figuratively lit the American dollar on fire because of stimulus checks, because of awful public policy. We printed more money than we have coming in. We're running $2-3 trillion deficits. And Trump's like, that's a great question, buddy. I love my tariffs so much. I want to maybe prove how much I love my tariffs by sending people rebate checks from the government to prove that my tariffs are working. Now, if he's right, and these tariffs do, and they are so far, we'll see how this plays out over the long term, but so far he's right, they are bringing money into, of course, the United States coffers. Who's paying for them? Well, right now it looks like businesses are and have either front-loaded a lot of their imports to get ahead of tariffs. We'll see what happens once they have to start paying them regularly. But in some cases, too, the company's taken the haircut. They have not necessarily, in many cases, passed this cost on to the consumer. Not yet. That may come. But that's not the conversation right now. The conversation that led to Josh Hawley saying, great idea, is Trump saying we're going to use tariff revenues to then send out potential rebate checks to certain Americans. So Josh Hawley puts up, and he shares that video, and he puts up a post on X, and he writes here, I will introduce legislation in the United States Senate to send a rebate check to every working person in America. What a dumb idea. And I like Josh Hawley. He is a friend of the show, but what an absolutely dumb idea by Josh Hawley. So who gets the rebate check? What's a working person exactly? How do we define this? And by the way, Hawley's getting roasted in his comments by a lot of his supporters. We don't need this. We don't need, the last thing we need to do is have the government sending checks to people. I know that Josh Hawley's trying to balance this whole, I'm a populist, but I'm a conservative Republican, and trying to find this lane that doesn't really exist. I'm a populist, but I'm a Christian, but I'm a conservative, but I'm this, but I'm that. The lane that he has drawn up in his mind is too narrow. It doesn't exist. But these are the kinds of policies that he believes he can use to define himself as a politician going forward. And I don't really have a problem with him looking for a lane. Every politician who has future ambitions tries to find a lane for themselves that makes them stand out. But this is not the way. We learned the hard way during COVID that if you just decide you're going to send checks to people when you're 30, at the time, $30 trillion in debt? Once again, now we're at $37 trillion in debt. You will cause inflation. Who will that hurt the most? That will hurt the same working people that you insist you're trying to help the most. That will help those who are working, who are trying to get ahead, who are trying to save some money, because you will continue to devalue the dollar. That's what you're going to do here. That's it. And Josh Hawley's got to know better. I mean, I like to think that he does, but sometimes I wonder when I see statements like this. On X, Josh Hawley had 10,000 comments in response to his post, and he only had 6,500 reposts, which, as the kids call it, he got ratioed pretty hard, meaning there were more responses to his post than there were people saying this is a great idea and sharing that post. Stop. Some of the comments included, just pay down the debt. Sending everyone what amounts to a pittance may look good, but in the long run, it only amounts to so much virtue signaling. Somebody else writing to Josh Hawley, please don't. We need to focus on paying down the debt. Someone else writing, this is from Vance, redistributing taxpayer money through checks to people is a form of socialism and should not happen. So, there was not a lot of, wow, great idea, Josh Hawley, in these comments that I'm reading through here. And I'm glad that a lot of his followers and supporters, including those of us in Missouri, used our voices, used our platforms on social media, and I'll use this platform on KCMO to say, dumb idea, please don't do it. 913-408-7957 is how you join us on KCMO. I mean, if you think this is a great idea for Josh Hawley, I'm all ears. I'd be happy to hear why, but I'm not seeing it and I'm not buying it. Coming up, a letter to the editor at the KC Star from a KU professor. That's a doozy. Coming up next. Sometimes you read these letters to the editor in the Kansas City Star, and they read like satire, but the best part is they're actually real. Good morning. It's great to have you here on KCMO Talk Radio. It is 6:34 as we get it rolling on a Monday. So last week, before I took a couple of days off, I told you the story about how KU employees have until the end of the month to remove their pronouns from their email signatures. This is because of a law passed by the state legislature. So, of course, the Star was going to highlight some of the people who were upset about this. And this was just classic KU professor nonsense in this letter to the editor at the Kansas City Star. This professor is named Amy Castle. That's A-M-I-I. So if you're son or daughter is heading to KU and they're set to be in Amy Castle's class, maybe try to get him into a different one. I'm just saying, you do with that information what you want. So Amy says here that she will, of course, go ahead and remove her pronouns from her signature block on her KU email. But she went on to explain why she does this. She writes here to the Star, why do I include my pronouns in my signature block? I do it to tell my most marginalized students, my LGBTQIA and non-binary students, that I recognize and support their existence. I'm telling my students that I have thought about how making gender assumptions, sometimes resulting in wrong ones, might result in a student feeling embarrassed or alienated. This is the opposite of how I want any KU student to feel. Now, I would agree with that. There's nothing wrong with what Amy is writing there. She doesn't want students to feel embarrassed or alienated. Now, that's also part of growing up. That's also part of becoming an adult. And I would say once in a while, getting embarrassed is actually okay. Getting embarrassed is one of those things that actually makes you reflect, makes you look in the mirror, and makes you think twice about the decisions that you've made. So I understand what she's going for, and in theory, she's right. I don't want to embarrass anybody. I don't want to make anybody feel bad or alienated. That sounds really good. But think about your own life. Some of the most valuable moments happen to you when you get embarrassed, when you become alienated over something, when you feel misunderstood. Because those are the moments when you actually self-reflect on decisions that you've made and say to yourself, well, maybe I've got to change the way I'm going about my business. It's not a bad thing to be embarrassed once in a while. Frankly, we all need it. So Amy goes on the right here to the Kansas City Star. I also included my pronouns for my non-LGBTQIA students to act as a role model for acceptance and tolerance of groups to which we might not belong. I show how we can easily include all Jayhawks no matter whom they love or with which gender they identify. Once again, that sounds good on paper. But this notion that you have to basically virtue signal to prove that you will treat people the same, that's not a game that any of us should want to play. You're just virtue signaling. I don't put, and I would never in a million years put my pronouns in my freaking email signature. But I can treat people the same way no matter who they are. Now, it doesn't mean I would accept of a boy playing in girls' sports. I would never, as the father of 3 daughters, be okay with that. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about just treating people like decent people. Regardless of their sexual orientation, regardless of how they want to identify, I can treat people, and I do my absolute best to treat people the same way. It doesn't mean I'll allow them to do things that are inherently unfair, like if they're a male playing female sports, but when you talk about just interacting with people and talking to people, I can do that, and we should all do that. But I shouldn't have to virtue signal with my freaking pronouns in my email signature to prove to somebody that I can treat them nicely if I interact with them on an email or in person or anything like that. And that's what this KU professor clearly is missing out on. Now, Amy Castle goes on the right here in her letter to the editor, because of course, right, with the Star, saying, I've taught thousands of KU students, many of whom are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, or non-binary. And I've taught lots of students who are asexual or intersex. I know Mark's not with us today. He's still doing a stand-in gig for Ted Lasso. But I remember Mark had, and John, you probably forget, but Mark might have been the one who had all the information on asexual, intersex, transgender, queer. I thought all this stuff more or less means the same thing, but I'm starting to get confused, I admit.
In my day, we just called him a worm. I think that's kind of how we learned it, anatomy of a worm. So.
I mean, listen, I'm all about whatever you want to do with yourself. You do your thing, right? But I'm just trying to keep track of what's what, and I can't differentiate all these things anymore. I really can't figure it out.
Well, if you split me in half, I'll replicate into 2 of me. So that's whatever sexual that is. That's me.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yep, I'm with you. So the author goes on the note here, I know these students, they exist on campus, and the legislature cannot erase them. No one's trying to erase anybody here. You are still fully capable of being who you want to be in the state of Kansas. But if you work for, obviously, the state, you're removing your pronouns. And the other thing is, if you're under the age of 18, we are not going to let you get surgery on your body that will impact you for the rest of your life. Guess what? Why? Because you can't drink, you can't smoke, you can't rent a car, you can't drive a car, you can't get a tattoo. We're not going to let you start chopping off your body parts as a minor. As an adult in Kansas, you do your thing, you do you.
Yep.
Nobody is trying to erase anybody in the state of Kansas. So this whole letter to the editor in the Kansas City Star, John, is just one big 4-paragraph diatribe of gaslighting is all this is.
I'm always puzzled by educators that seem to know the sexuality of their students.
Yeah.
Back in my day, it would have been, take it outside,
Yeah.
Don't bring it up. Take it outside here.
That's so true.
I'm a little concerned about that. Do we do surveys at the beginning of the class? What's up with that?
I don't even want to know what this teacher is doing in her classroom.
But
then again, I am assuming the pronouns of Amy Castle as a woman here, Amy Castle in Lawrence, so I probably shouldn't do that if I'm playing by her rules.
Right. Touche.
She ends her letter to the editor saying, until the July 31st deadline, I'm still signing off as Amy Castle, she, her. What's the old saying? Not all heroes wear capes, right? I mean, my gosh. Does she want a statue of herself at KU because she hung on to her pronouns until the July 31st deadline? You've got to be kidding me with this. Just let kids go to college and teach them something that matters in the real world and leave the rest of this social engineering nonsense to parents, to friends, to loved ones, to maybe the culture to some degree. But, man, this is not exactly a ringing endorsement for sending your kid to KU. I'm years away from having to do that with my 3 little kids, but something tells me that, getting stuff like this and seeing letters like this don't exactly give me a ringing endorsement for the university, which is sad because there's a lot of things that KU bring to the table. But stuff like this is just nuts. On the text line, Pete, I wonder if she cares as much about not marginalizing conservatives in her classroom. Ooh. That's an excellent point on the text line. See, there's this we've got to protect everybody based on, and listen, we should treat people the same based on race and based on gender and obviously, based on any other setbacks or whatever you want to call it that people may have, whether it comes to learning disabilities or anything like that. But that is an excellent point on the text line. Does this professor at KU care as much about not marginalizing conservatives as she does about, the gender crowd? Something tells me her answer to that might be a little bit different because those people to her are domestic terrorists. Coming up, the 6 at 6. Top 6 stories in the 6 o'clock hour you don't want to miss. Next on KCMO 95.7 FM. Well, we're monitoring the President of the United States. He is meeting right now with the UK Prime Minister in Scotland. So any news that comes out of that we'll bring to you right here on KCMO Talk Radio. 7:05 on a Monday morning. Of course, a busy week ahead with the President overseas. And, of course, back here at home, a lot going on as well. 1 hour from now, we'll be joined by Wyandotte County Sheriff Daniel Soptic, who is now reeling after the loss of one of their own deputies over the weekend in a tragic incident, Elijah Ming dying in the line of duty. So the Wyandotte County Sheriff will be here 1 hour from now on KCMO Talk Radio. Now, this, of course, has gotten a lot of attention over the last few days, and that is the cancellation of Stephen Colbert's show. And I wanted to bring this to you courtesy of the New York Post. They wrote about how Stephen Colbert had 176 left-leaning guests and only one Republican in the last 3 years, according to a study by media watchdog Newsbusters. 176 to 1. In the first 6 months of this year, the show booked 43 left-leaning political guests and 0 conservatives, leading all late-night programs in partisan tilt. And you wonder why the show was losing $40 million a year and ended up getting canceled. Because Colbert's show was not intended to be a comedy show for all Americans. It was a late-night group therapy session for far-left liberals. That's what it was. I mean, I talk to you guys all the time. I'm pretty transparent about how I try to book this show. Obviously, I bring on guests that are, I think, bigger names nationally, as many as we can bring on, who can talk about the news of the day, many of whom have ties to Fox, right, where we are affiliated. However, just last week, we had on a guest from CNBC. I try to bring on guests that disagree with me as much as I can. Now, a lot of people in today's environment, for whatever reason, don't want to come on a show where they perceive the host as potentially not agreeing with them. But we had on a guy, and I'm blanking on his name. I don't mean to do this. But 2 weeks ago, we had on a guy who was right here in Kansas and was talking about how the one big beautiful bill was going to drop, thousands of people from Medicaid in Kansas, and this was going to be the worst thing ever. And we had a great, robust back and forth debate on this. And you guys responded tremendously to that interview. So I want to do as much of that as I possibly can. I don't really try to book a show with people who are just going to agree with me on everything. I don't want to do that.
Right.
Now, sometimes it's harder, John. Mm-hmm. Like, we've had on Emmanuel Cleaver. We've had on Sharice Davids.
Mm-hmm.
However, Laura Kelly's been on the show multiple times. I would say as time has gone on, it has gotten harder to book some of these guests, but it's not from lack of trying on my end.
No,
and I guarantee you, Colbert could have on a bunch of conservatives, and they would definitely take him up on the offer.
Absolutely. It's not because you don't try to reach people is what I wanted to point out. Some people are guarded, even the Republicans, And I think it has more to do with the personalities. A guy like Manny Abarca will come on. Quentin Lucas comes on, and they tend to be more on the left of what we're talking about, but they're just more comfortable with it. I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with it, and they kind of hide.
That's a great point. Manny Abarca, I have not had him on in a while, but he would come on this show. Heck, he would sometimes pitch himself to come on this show. Quentin Lucas comes on every week. Eric Schmidt, God bless Eric Schmidt. I like him.
Right.
And I don't know if it's him or his staff, but they are the biggest pains in the asses I deal with in the area. If for whatever reason, I don't know why, and maybe that's too much information I'm divulging into right now, but Schmidt's people, and I love the guy, they are the biggest pains in the butt that I deal with in the entire Kansas City area. It's like their egos are tremendous. They've canceled on me twice in the last 2 weeks, Eric Schmidt's people. I don't know why, but they've canceled on me twice. So my point is, I try to book them across the board. Obviously, we'll have some more success probably with Republicans than Democrats, but that's not always the case.
No.
It's not. And Colbert is so out of touch, and then you wonder why your show gets canceled, John.
Yeah. Well, I was circling back to Schmidt. We were kind of chiding him about the whole St. Louis Cardinals thing, I think, on one of his initial announcements of running. So, there's that cross-state thing.
I think that he's just got some people who are
busy. He's busy.
Maybe a little misguided. I'll just leave it at that.
But
I don't want to make it about him.
To the point, we can get people on the left sometimes, and not even people from the right on other times. So you try, you do the best you can.
Exactly. But Colbert's not even trying. That's the difference here.
Touché.
He didn't even try. The one Republican he brought on in the last 3.5 years was freaking Liz Cheney. That doesn't even count in my book, okay? That, Liz Cheney as your lone conservative to coming on your show the last 3.5 years doesn't actually count. No, please. That's not good.
Princess Bride, where you say, you keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. That's not exactly a conservative, is it?
No, not at all. You can't even count that one. So I thought this was really interesting. Jay Leno talked about this over the weekend at the Hollywood Reporter, the way that late-night hosts have become more and more political. And Jay Leno said it very well. He said, first off, and this was a very good point, he said here, I got hate letters back in the day saying, you and your Republican friends, and another one saying, I hope you and your Democratic buddies are happy over the same joke. That is brilliant from Jay Leno. He then said, that's how you get a whole audience. Now, you have to be content if you get hyper-political with late-night comedy with only half the audience because you have to give your opinion. Now, I will say that Greg Gutfeld has obviously developed a very popular show late at night that is comedy for conservatives, making fun of mostly just liberals. However, that was a response to the marketplace, right? Because Fallon and Colbert and Kimmel all leaned one way. Greg Gutfeld made the decision to say, well, if you're going to do that, I'm going to lean the other way, and I'll basically corner the other half of the market that you have turned a blind eye to and build a big audience doing that. Because a lot of people reached out to me and they said, well, Gutfeld just does that for the right. I said, yes, but he was responding. He was responding to how the marketplace had reacted. And that's basically what Fox News did 30 years ago, right? It's the same exact playbook. Just Gutfeld did it with comedy. So he didn't start this. He just said, if you guys are going to ignore comedy for half the country, I'll serve them with my one show, and I'll do better than all of you in the ratings. And that's exactly what he's done. Let's go to the phone. Stephen is in KCK. Stephen, go ahead. You're on KCMO. Good morning.
Hey, Pete, I saw that Jay Leno story, too. I thought that was extremely interesting. My question is, what's the difference, like President Trump said, Jimmy Kimmel's next. Jimmy Kimmel does the same show. It's just a replication of the same formula, except on the West Coast. I mean, the scary part is that, what's his name, the Fallon, actually, when he started, he wasn't doing politics, and then the other guys sort of browbeat him and shamed him into doing it. I mean, I don't know. I think Kimmel really is next. I mean, I don't see why that show exists. Other than Disney to promote their stuff that is bad for people. I mean, I cannot understand that he hasn't been funny since he was on the Man Show. I mean, Fallon's okay. There's always be a place for the Tonight Show. I mean, no matter what your politics are, I don't think Fallon is as bad as the other one.
I'm not so sure. I agree with that. Thanks for the call, Steve. And I agree with you. Fallon is definitely the best of the bunch. Now, that's not saying much. That's kind of like the tallest midget argument, but I get your point. Remember, Fallon got a ton of flack for humanizing Trump back in 2016. He played with Trump's hair to prove it was real. And he got eviscerated for that because you could not humanize Donald Trump as a late-night comedian, even though that really was part of the game and part of the goal. But ever since then, Fallon hasn't been the same. It's not just obviously what's going on with these shows leaning left. It's also the business model has changed. The idea was you had a big primetime lineup for these networks. You'd roll into local news at 11 o'clock Eastern. You'd feed that into your late-night program, and bing, bang, boom, you do it again the next day. These networks have no desirable content anymore at night. Television is very fragmented right now, more fragmented than it's ever been. It's in a worse place than it's ever been, especially when you talk about younger viewers. And these late-night shows just aren't carrying the load and carrying the importance that they used to. And the icing on the cake is how political they've gotten. So I think the whole industry is going to be upended. And I don't say that with joy because a lot of regular people lose their jobs when this stuff happens. But they didn't help themselves by shrinking the potential size of their audience at a time when the audience size was organically shrinking to begin with because people were leaving network TV. So they doubled down and they expedited their own death, and that was a major mistake. 913-408-7957 is how you join us on KCMO Talk Radio. We've got some favorability numbers to get to that I want to make sure I don't take the same old approach as some people to this very topic. I'll explain that after something hits an all-time low that's very concerning coming up next. Nice job there by Bill O'Reilly, more or less confirming what we were just saying. The only thing I'll disagree with Bill on, as he talked about Colbert, is that Colbert's hyper-partisanship is what led to low ratings and revenue losses. So what Bill was saying there is that it's not about the ratings, it's not about the revenue, and then he says it's about the fact that it was a hyper-partisan show, and the fact was he only booked left-wing guests, which is what we were just talking about. All that is absolutely true there from Stephen Colbert. There's no doubt about, or from Bill O'Reilly. Absolutely right. But it was that vision for the show that led to the low ratings, that led to the $40 million a year in revenue losses. So all that stuff led to the outcome of the show, which, of course, is getting canceled come next year. So this dropped over the weekend from the CDC. And it's the most overlooked yet important issue that we have in America today, and it's our birth rate hitting an all-time low. The fertility rate in the United States dropped to an all-time low in 2024, with fewer than 1.6 children being born per woman, federal data released shows. Now, for a long time, the U.S. was once among only a few developed countries with a rate that ensured each generation had enough children to replace itself, about 2.1 kids per woman. That is no longer the case, and we have been trending downward on this for a very long time. We are now on the same levels as some Western European countries. What do? Well, the Trump administration is trying to do some things like encourage IVF, expand access, reduce the cost of in vitro fertilization. They've, of course, forwarded the idea of baby bonuses and things like that for when kids are born. That's all very surface area. We have cultural issues. We have societal issues. And yes, there are some economic issues as well here, right? But I don't believe it when people say, well, I can't buy a house, therefore I can't have a kid. I can't afford a home. I've got student loan debt. Well, how am I going to pay for a wedding? Listen, you can get married and you can put the things that matter first at the forefront and you'll be okay. It's like anything else in life. If you prioritize what you want to prioritize, the rest will work itself out. You don't need necessarily a 3,000 square foot home at 35 years old to raise a child. You just don't need that, especially in the early days when the kid, and I say this as someone who has 3 kids, 6 and under, is more or less a blob that you just got to make sure stays alive, and you wake up with them in the middle of the night, you feed them, you do all that stuff. That's what you have to do. We have major societal and cultural rot where a lot of people don't see the value in family. They don't see the value in marriage. You have some people who are like, climate change is going to kill us all. Why am I going to bring a kid into this world? Well, if that's not the most ridiculous thing you've heard in a while, I'm not sure what is. You have other people who insist, well, I've got student loan debt. I can't have a child. Yes, you can. We are devaluing the family. Our government's done that for the better part of 60 years as well. And now we also live in a hookup culture. That's a sad reality, too, for too many people. They don't see the value on settling down, despite the fact that while it's the most difficult thing you'll ever do, it's also, being a parent, the most rewarding thing you will ever do. And until you do it, you don't believe that. You don't realize it. And I don't know if there's a thing that Trump or anybody can do about this. Politicians really can't change this. The culture has to change. And I do think it's starting to. But boy, it is not going to turn itself around overnight. And now we find ourselves at historic lows. And the only replacement possibility then is going to have to be through a legal immigration process. So the President of the United States has been doing this off-the-cuff press conference here over the last, 30, 40 minutes or so. I mean, just one of those classic Trump press conferences where it's more or less an off-the-cuff back and forth. He is, of course, overseas, visiting this morning with the UK Prime Minister. Got a big trade agreement with the EU yesterday. And this was great, Trump. I didn't play the press conference because, as you know, a lot of these things just go on and on and on and on and on in classic Trump fashion. However, this, from just a few minutes ago, was one of the most valuable things that the President of the United States had to say when it comes to where the economy is right now and where he thinks it's headed going forward. Here was Donald Trump just moments ago.
I have a theory that low taxes bring growth. We just passed a big tax cut bill, the biggest bill in the history of our country, actually. And one big, beautiful bill. I used to call it the great one big, beautiful. We took the word great out. But it's actually called the one big, beautiful bill. It's essentially a very large tax cut bill for everybody. And our country's, pretty soon, I think I can say it right now, our country's never done better. We had a country that was dead. It was dead 6 months ago, a year ago. Leaders from NATO, we had a very successful meeting NATO. Your prime minister was there. It was an unbelievable love fest with all of those countries. And they agreed to go 5% and all the things. Very smart to do. But many of the leaders said, essentially, they said, your country was dead 1 year ago. 1 year ago, we had a dead, and we did. We had a dead country. We had a president who didn't know where the hell he was. We had horrible, horrible people running our country. I think they were sick people, actually, sick. You talk about censorship. Those are big. That's all they did was censor, and they didn't know what to do. And they had high taxes. They wanted more tax, total censorship, transgender for everybody, men playing in women's sports, everything bad they wanted, and they still do. That's what they still do. That's why they're down at 15% or something. I saw it today, the lowest that the other part of the Democrats have ever been. But no, I find that when you lower taxes, you get growth.
Oh, that was a classic Trump weave job right there is what that was. He worked it all in there in about a 90-second clip. That was just moments ago in Turnberry, Scotland, where the president is right now taking questions from the media. So that was great Trump. Tax cuts leads to growth. That leads to more money for all Americans, and that leads to us hopefully getting to a point where our deficits start shrinking, and dare I say, you actually start paying down some of the $37 trillion in debt. I'm probably being optimistic on that front because we're still running deficits that are way too big. That's why the big, beautiful bill, as he dubbed it, is not nearly as beautiful as some people are making it out to be. And whatever, I get the politics of calling it the one big, beautiful bill, but there's a lot of ugly in the one big, beautiful, sometimes ugly bill, but there's also a lot of beauty in it. So whatever. We'll split hairs on that. What I will say, though, is that when the president talks about his overall vision of cutting taxes for regular Americans, like no tax on tips, not the wealthy just had their taxes remain where they were, right? They didn't cut the income tax for the wealthy here in this bill. They kept them where they were. There was a slight cut in 2017, and this bill was just maintaining those levels. I actually, and I said this at the time, in hindsight, what I would have done if I was the Republican Party, I would have actually ticked up the income tax rate for the highest earning Americans, just so the Democrats would not be able to say, hey, this is just about Trump getting a tax cut for his rich buddies. And I would have been like, listen, we increased the highest level of income tax rates from like 37 to 38. I would have just ticked it up a hair just to win the political argument as well. And then really cut taxes and look at how to get tax breaks for regular working people, which this bill did do a pretty darn good job of. But you have to hope, if you're a supporter of this bill, that you get massive economic growth of like 3, 4, 5%, because that's the only way you've got a chance to try to chip away at the $37 trillion in debt. And there has to be more cuts. You have to do entitlement reform. I just don't know if the president's going to be able to do that, because he would have to do it in the next 12 months. If not, you got to hope that you hold the House in 26, you hold the Senate, and then you focus on that your final 2 years in office. And that has been the red herring that nobody wants to touch. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, nobody wants to touch it. Meantime, these things are really the backbone of what's destroying the debt. More than any foreign policy issue, more than money to Ukraine, more than anything, we are losing money because of these scam programs. And Social Security is robbing Peter to pay Paul. I mean, that's how the system is built, right? That's it. You're not getting your own money back. You're getting somebody else's money. And then each passing generation is getting someone else's money. That's how it works. That's why we also have a crisis with our fertility rate sitting at 1.6 right now, which came out from the CDC last week, and I'll get to more of that coming up here later in the show. But we are not replacing workers. We're not replacing people in this country. The only way to keep it going, to keep the growth going that we need, to keep programs like Social Security and Medicaid and Medicare somewhat solvent, because they're not solvent, is through legal immigration. Because we are not reproducing and having kids at the rates that we need to. You got to get to about 2.1 for replacement rate. We're now at 1.6. It's a massive problem. And, I don't know what the government can do to fix any of that out of the gates. But, boy, there's got to be something that they can start looking at, because the only other way to do it is to cut. And they're going to have to cut. But the president continues this meeting right now with the UK Prime Minister. Now, that was great, Trump, just a few minutes ago. Not so great is what we got over the weekend. And then Josh Hawley took the not so great and put it on steroids. First off, here was the president talking about tariffs and how they've got more money coming in courtesy of his tariffs, which is true for now. The question is, what does it do to prices overall going forward? That's still the question that's kind of lingering out there. But the president threw out this idea. I don't take him literally on this idea. I think he's just speaking off the cuff. But then we got Josh Hawley doubling down on this idea, which I'll explain after we hear from the President of the United States and what he said over the weekend. Yeah, that was the Hawley clip. Sorry, the second one there, Garner. Hawley clip right below. Let's play that audio of what President Trump had to say, and then we'll get to Josh Hawley's response.
Mr. President, with all of that revenue coming in, tens of billions of dollars, do you think there's the possibility of a rebate to the American public in terms of all of that money?
We're thinking about that, actually. We have so much money coming in, we're thinking about a little rebate, but the big thing we want to do is pay down debt. But we're thinking about a rebate. That's a very good question. You just made a lot of news. We're thinking about a rebate because we have so much money coming in from tariffs that a little rebate for people of a certain income level might be very nice.
So the president there talks about a rebate. You can hear it there. The president is saying, hey, with all the tariff money we've got coming in, maybe we'll consider a rebate for working class Americans. Now, I think that's just Trump talking off the cuff and being like, hey, great question, buddy. I love you. What a great idea. We'll kick some of the tariff money back to working Americans. But that's one of those, you take Trump seriously but not literally moments. Like, I think Trump's just kind of talking off the cuff and being like, yeah, sure, sounds like a great idea. But nothing comes of it. Well, then, Missouri U.S. Senator Josh Hawley takes that idea and runs with it further. And he posts on X over the weekend, I will introduce legislation in the Senate to send a rebate check to every working person in America. No, Senator Hawley. I like Senator Hawley. He's a friend of the show. But this is a dumb with an exclamation point idea. We tried checks to the American people, and you know who it hurt the most? Working people, poor people. We created 40-year highs in inflation because of COVID monies that started under Trump and got way worse under Biden, and then we got 40-year highs on inflation that didn't impact the top 1%. They don't care if their egg prices go up by $1 or $2 for a carton. Regular people, working people, are the ones who got crushed by big government checks. They're the ones. So Josh Hawley's saying he's going to introduce legislation in the Senate to send a rebate check to every working person in America. I saw that over the weekend and I was like, what? No, please stop. No, this is not what we need. And I don't know why some of these politicians seem to have convenient amnesia on this stuff. Like, my goodness, we literally tried this 5 years ago. And it was a great case against ever doing it again. Because what it led to was the working American who was feeling great after they got a $1,500 check in 2020 and 2021, having years and years of pain. And the pain is going to be here for a long time because even though inflation is down, it's not negative, right? Now we're down at about 2.5% inflation, but it's not reversing. We're never going back to 2019, 2020 prices. All we're trying to do now is prevent the pain from getting worse at a faster rate. And Josh Hawley's idea of sending rebate checks to working people in America is only going to make it worse for the people that he insists he wants to help. I mean, I just don't understand where these people, I know it, they try to find a political win where they can, and it sounds good on paper. We're bringing in X amount of monies to the Treasury from tariffs, and now we're going to send you a check with that money. First off, could you pay down some debt, please? The dollar's had its worst year in 50 years. You know what? The best thing you can do for a regular working class family is stop devaluing the dollar. Because right now they are not getting the pay raises that they need to keep up with where the dollar's at today. Meaning their dollar that they make is getting less valuable. And they're not invested in the markets at the rate they need to be invested in to make up for any of that. So it's like, my goodness, pump the brakes. I wouldn't have thought much of this after Trump's clip, but then Hawley's like, I'm introducing legislation, and I'm like, please, God, no. No, don't do it. 913-408-7957. On the text line, Pete, I've come to the conclusion that there is something in the water in Washington, D.C. Oh, gosh, yes. I think it's strong vodka or tequila or something, and they all are required to drink it every morning because nothing else makes sense to me. I mean, are they all just drunk permanently? That's the only conclusion I sometimes come to if I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt. Oh, my goodness gracious. Little Billy Joel coming on back. Hey, John, I don't know if you've seen it, but HBO is doing a docu-series on Billy Joel, and I caught a little bit over the weekend. It's called Billy Joel and So It Goes, and it is, it's very well done. I would recommend it, not only if you're a fan of Billy Joel, but if you're just a fan of music. I think HBO did a terrific job with this.
Kind of a Ken Burns type treatment? Something like that?
Yeah, I don't know if I call it Ken Burns style, but it is very. Billy Joel gave him full access.
Okay.
You got the access to all the ex-wives, which is a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, there's a lot of them too. I think he's got 3 ex-wives. So I just think it's, as these guys from that era get older, and he's 76, I think telling these stories are important. And one of the things that was mentioned about that song, We Didn't Start the Fire, and this probably is after your time, obviously, of being in school. You were working in Kansas City radio by then, and it was too early for me. But that song was heralded by many teachers as being a great history lesson and a fun way for students at that time in the late 1980s, early 1990s to basically learn American history. So go figure.
I remember playing it quite a bit, yeah.
Played it back in the heyday, back in your early DJ days around Kansas City?
As my friend and people around and listeners know, Bobby Day, we like to date ourselves. So we'll say, well, I played that when it was a current, meaning you played when it was new, right? So, played that when it was a current.
Yep. Well, it is. If you're looking for something to watch in the days ahead, maybe bookmark it for next weekend. If you have HBO, I have not watched the whole thing.
Is it multi-piece?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a 2 or 3 parter, Billy Joel and So It Goes, HBO documentary about the singer and songwriter, talking about his tabloid troubles, his alcohol issues, of course, financial issues that he ran into at what was supposed to be the peak of his career. I mean, this happens to all these guys, right? They have a manager who they trust who ends up taking them for a ride and stealing all of their money. I mean, it's a tale as old as time with these musicians, and I didn't realize how bad Billy Joel's financial situation was in the mid-1980s, but it really set the tone and set the stage for the second half of his writing career all the way through the mid-1990s. So it's a good watch, and it goes into a lot of detail on things that I didn't realize about him.
Yeah, I know I'm going to like the early stuff about his New York days and writing about the things around New York leading up through the album The Stranger and 52nd Street for sure. I'm going to like that period.
I would definitely check it out if you've got HBO and you got time in the days ahead. Well worth your time. Billy Joel and So It Goes.